Good morning, everyone. My name is Aubrey Lane, and I'm the Secretary of Transportation for the Commonwealth of Virginia. And even though today is a rail subcommittee meeting, I have invited many of the CTB members, and I appreciate all of you showing up today for what I believe will be not only an informative but an important meeting for the Ashland locality, but also the entire quarter of this DC to RVA study. But as we always do, now that we've all gotten seated, before we start any transportation meeting, I would ask you to please join me in saying, rise and sing our national anthem. Pledge of Allegiance.
You're going to have to leave. And us singing the national anthem, you're going to have to leave.
It was a Freudian slip. So anyway, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. You know, I appreciate many of the kind words you've had. You noticed that I'm on crutches, and I told the governor I was coming down here today. We had this important meeting. He said, you know what, that's really important. You break a leg and get down there. So I did. So, but I appreciate all of the comments. Now, as I said today, our agenda is pretty straightforward. We're going to present our recommendation for the Ashland area in conjunction with the entire quarter. So I want to make it clear to our CTB members and to the audience that this is really a recommendation for the entire quarter, although it will be the first time today that the CTB members and the public will see the staff recommendations for Ashland. What we will do is go through that presentation, and then we will have public comment. I thought it was appropriate for our public to see what our recommendation is before they make their comments. Now, as you see, we have today's purpose up there, and as I mentioned, we're going to tell you about the draft EIS public comments that we've received over the last few weeks, 60 days. And this will be a full month for the CTB to consider those comments before they actually vote. So I want to make it clear there is no vote today. We will have recommendations for the full quarter, and particularly for everyone that's here today, you can see on the screen that our recommendation is going to be the 323 Alternative 5A for the Ashland area. And I'm going to come back and talk a little bit about that before we get started. The Richmond area recommendation, which we already had disclosed, but we are reaffirming the full-service Main Street Staples Mill alternative, that's 6F. We have a CTB resolution because in addition to adopting this, there are some other considerations I would ask the CTB to consider, and then we're going to have a public comment period. So one of the reasons I decided to make the recommendation for Ashland known right up front, we are here for the full quarter. It certainly is really about this area because, as you know, we've taken the last, 8 months, about 8 months to work with the community and try to reach some consensus on how to move forward. Now, when I remember standing here 8 or 9 months ago, and I think we had the first meeting and say we were going to move forward on this, we were asked to come up and have the full CTB. We actually came up and viewed the area here to make as we began this process. I made several points, and like to review those with you. First of all, we did ask the federal FRA if we could exclude this from our recommendation, in that many of these improvements may not be needed for many years. We were declined. The FRA said we must make a decision regarding this 127-mile quarter, and Ashland needs to be a part of that decision. Governor McAuliffe was asked at the last governor's transportation question about this, and his response was that it was his fiduciary responsibility and his administration to make this recommendation, knowing full well it was going to impact somebody, which was the second point that I made at that opening session, was that someone was going to be impacted. Because what we have on the table today is not if something's going to happen. There is going to be increased usage through the quarter. The question is how to best deal with it. So that is the reason why we had to come to some conclusion on the quarter. And this is not just a freight impact, but it is also a passenger rail impact. Now that leads me to a very important constituent, and that is CSX. As you know, CSX owns this track. And any improvements that we would do to it or in coordination with it, they would need to approve or at least weigh in on what was happening, because it is their track. Now, if you follow the newspapers, you know there's quite a bit of changes going on at CSX. They've had a management takeover. They've had some operational issues. They've been in front of the Transportation Board at the federal level talking about freight impacts and what it's done to passenger rail. And they've had significant management changeover. In fact, most of the people that we were dealing with when this process started a year and a half ago are no longer with CSX. So they have a completely, and that's the way it just happens to work when you're dealing with a transportation asset you don't own. Their new philosophy is they have made it very clear that they are running this railroad for freight. That is their major emphasis on their line here. And so they are not, and I have in front of me a package here of their public comments, which you're happy to look at. They are not as concerned about passenger rail, but believe it's going to be significant impacts in freight movements in this quarter. And I'll tell you up front, they do not agree with the alternative that we're going to recommend. Now, let me give you some background as to why we chose this alternative, and of course, Jennifer will go into the technical details as we go through this. Number one, another thing I mentioned here, I was hopeful that as we had this public discussion, that the community, look, I knew somebody was going to be impacted, but I have been actually very saddened by some of the comments, and and unfortunately, it's pit neighbor against neighbor. And I think that is unfortunate, and I wish there was a way around it. As I said before, we simply had asked that we not make this decision now, but we were declined in that. So one of the biggest criteria for us was what is the least impact we can make on the existing corridor based on the facts we know today. Because while I do believe the operational analysis are the best information that we have, and we have to rely on it, the chances of it changing in the future is going to be significant. It always is, because we're talking 20, 30 years in the future. So at best, it's our best understanding of what it is. It may in no way reflect exactly what's going to happen. I tend to look at it more as trend, and that is it's going to be increasing activity through the quarter. But the improvements may be many years out. We have technological advances that could come into play that could help offset these improvements. And as I've mentioned, CSX and its strategy, again, may change. We have no idea what that may be in the future. So a key consideration for the McAuliffe administration was what is the least amount of impact we could do now in making this decision? Because we will have to go through a similar process in the future whenever these decisions are made. So in other words, even after today, if you're not in agreement with the decision, it is not the end of it, because when we actually come and get the funding to do this, whenever that may be, we will have to go through a similar situation again. But we understand that whatever decision we make today is going to at least publicly, and I'll, for the lack of a better word, use a cloud in saying that this is our intention. So that weighed heavily on our impact of our decision to move forward. Two things: not wanting to impact people unnecessarily, not knowing the outcome, and two, understanding that the operational improvements that are needed may be helped by technology or other facts in the future when we really get to this capacity. Now, that doesn't necessarily, again, Jennifer's going to go through all the details, but those were two overriding factors. And with that in mind, and if you look at all the constituents, number one, property owners were at the top of our list in terms of constituents, because whether it's a road or a railroad, your property is taken, that's a significant event. So certainly property owners were very important to our decision. Second of all, our federal partners in making sure we met the criteria that was required of us. And let me reiterate again, while I don't think it'll be the case, at the end of the day, the FRA could decide to change the recommended alternative the Commonwealth Transportation Board chooses. I don't believe that'll be the case, but I cannot make the final decision, and I want to make that clear for them. So the federal rules that we have to go through were very important because while maybe not important today to Ashland because of the impact of construction, significant in terms of a federal grant we have and other improvements that are already funded north of here. So very important that we meet those federal guidelines. Certainly the public at large and safety were a big issue that had to be considered. And if you look at the resolution, we're going to recommend some conditions in that area. In fact, one part of the resolution will be that the CTB continue to monitor the situation in Ashland in regards to safety. Because one of the things that I witnessed firsthand, and many of the members have said to me when we were up here, is that safety, we need to do something because of where the tracks are right through the town and with the college. And even though there's not been, I know we heard testimony, not significant issues, I think we've been lucky that has been the case. Because they're in today's world, with a new track were built through a community, these standards would not be sufficient to allow that to happen. So those were very important constituents to us. And so with taking that in mind and all the other public comment that we've done, that we've looked at, and I think we could study this for the next few years and come to the same conclusion because as many of you have pointed out, we don't know exactly what the future is going to be. And others have said, well, we need to talk about this trench more. I agree 100%. I have no idea if that is the answer. But it could be an answer, and we're not making a decision on the trench today. We're not making that decision at all. We're just suggesting to you that could be an alternative. I don't know if you've been reading, just north of us here in Maryland, there's going to be a Hyperloop put in that Maryland's working with Elon Musk on. So I have no idea what for using our first bored tunnel at the Chesapeake Bay Bridge Tunnel. First time in the eastern United States, I believe it's been used, and first time in Virginia. So there are technologies that may help us in the future. So, but we're not making any decisions on those. What we're making the decision is today is one thing that we can't change is the track currently runs through the town of Ashland. That's where the track is today. Homeowners who have bought here understood that when they bought the homes. And I know we've heard a lot of testimony that maybe that they didn't understand there could be improvements to the track, and I understand that, but the right-of-way that CSX owns currently has been there. So that was a big factor in us in determining why would we cloud other people's issues without knowing what the true facts are in that regard. And the other issue in regards to that is we believe there can be operational issues north and south of town to mitigate significantly the impacts to the town. And I don't want to make it clear, that does not mean zero impacts. And I've said that from the beginning. There's going to be some impacts. But what we need to do is to work with the town to coordinate them in best we can in terms of its economic prosperity, but also safety. But at the end of the day, that's where the tracks are now. So we're going to go through the details technically, but I thought the public should understand, in addition to the technical details that led us there, we did consider the political, the personal, the others. And while I know everyone won't agree, I understand everyone won't agree with what we're going to recommend today, I do believe we have met our obligation to explain to you the process and the decision we're making today. And the decision is that we're going to try to use the current right-of-way to the extent possible and believe that that can be done to handle this new capacity. So that is the rationale. We'll have a chance for public comment afterwards, but I want to get that right up front. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer to take you through this presentation as to how we technically arrived at it, and then we'll have a chance for the board to have discussion. And by the way, the board can interrupt any time during the presentation. And then we will have public comment. Now, is there anything at the board right now that, before I turn this over for Jennifer, any questions or any comments before we move to the actual presentation? Okay. All right. With that, Jennifer, I'm going to turn it over to you. And let me first of all thank, the public for all the inputs you've had, but I also want to thank Jennifer and her team actually the press for reporting everything that's happened. Because one of the things I gave you our word, we would be transparent, and we have been. You may not have liked some of the things that we presented, but we have put everything out there. We have not tried to put anything, make any backroom deals. Everything you've seen has been out in public. So I want to thank the community and Jennifer and her team, because I know these are emotional, have been emotional, and very trying to people whose lives are impacted by this. But so, Jennifer.
All right. Thank you very much, Secretary Lane. You all are very familiar with the purpose of the project, but again, really the importance of the passenger rail improvements in this area is to increase both passenger and freight capacity. These parallel the I-95 corridor, which, as we all know, is one of the most congested corridors, and even being able to divert more trucks and more freight off of I-95 will require additional capacity here. Commuter rail is extremely important to us, especially in Northern Virginia, with VRE paralleling the I-95 corridor as well. So the improvements in the northern part of the corridor are very much dependent on the DC to RVA findings as well. The purpose of this project, though, is also to improve passenger rail and to provide more Amtrak round trips, an additional 9 round trips in the corridor. But importantly, we're also building upon and leveraging the investments, the many investments that the state has already made in this corridor. This, again, I just wanted to highlight the importance of this corridor to the passenger rail programs that we have across the entire state. In the northernmost part of the corridor, all of the traffic from Lynchburg, Roanoke, Charlottesville, Culpeper goes through the northernmost corridor, DC to RVA. Our trains from Norfolk, we have 2 more trains to Norfolk in the future planned, but also our Newport News service, everything does utilize this DC to RVA corridor. So we've been in the public comment period for the past 60 days, and I know at our last meeting we said that we would come back to you with a summary of what we've heard so far. We have received a total of 3,350 comments. Within those comments, we often have maybe multiple topics that are addressed in each of those. So our team has been collating all of those, tracking them, and as you can see, the majority of those topics have really been on the Ashland alignment. But there's a lot of other considerations that we've had throughout the entire corridor, including the Richmond alignment, which we'll talk a little bit about later, property impacts. I know Northern Virginia, we've had concerns about noise and vibration. But really, the majority of the comments that we've received and that we had during the public comment period, we did 5 public hearings throughout this corridor. The majority of the comments really were positive. I'd say in other, especially in other parts of this corridor. In Northern Virginia, we heard a lot of support for the project for connections to the southeast, but also connecting Virginia to points in the northeast. There are concerns, though, about noise and vibration, particularly in the Alexandria and Crystal City areas where the trains or the tracks are really right up among residential development. But what we heard the most was the desire for more stops. People wanted a stop in, we heard from Crystal City, from other communities there, Franconia, Springfield. That was sort of the majority of comments we got there. Again, in Fredericksburg, a lot of support for the project from the residents there. The greatest opposition that we had was to the Eastern Bypass alternative, and also concerns about individual property impacts, concerns about historic properties downtown, and noise and vibration as well. As I mentioned before, though, the comments that dominated all of this were really here in the Ashland and Hanover area. In terms of the alternatives that were opposed the most, it was really the Western Bypass and the below-grade through-town or trench option. The 323 alternative is the one that had the lowest level of opposition. We had less than 1% of the comments opposed to that. In Richmond, we also had very strong support for the project. Most of the comments we received were also expressed support for Main Street Station. However, as we'll discuss later, there are concerns about the historic slave trade sites in that area in Shockoe Bottom.
Jeff, I might make a comment about that. Some of the comments related to that are in conjunction with what are considered historic areas. The federal process requires us to consider those, obviously, but we don't make the determination of what a historic area is. And some of the comments in the Richmond area, if you're here for that, deal with that area where the Department of Historic Resources have not, at this point, designated them as a historic area. I'm not suggesting they should or they shouldn't be. I'm saying that the federal process, DHR, that would be if you have a complaint as to why this is in the historic area, that is something beyond the scope of our study. And obviously we would consider impacts, but a big part of it was other areas may get more foot traffic and other type of use in these areas. I get that, but for the federal compliance, it's got to be recognized by Department of Historic Resources as one of those areas. So if there is a complaint in that regard, and I'm not saying it's not a valid complaint, that needs to start with the DHR, with them, and getting that designated so that there are precautions. Now, that doesn't mean we haven't considered them, but I'm pointing out in the report, there was some criticism that that wasn't taken as much as some of the other areas. It's because they're not technically designated as historical areas by DHR. And so that doesn't mean that we don't have an issue and want to try to avoid them. It just simply means the report is fashioned in terms of federal guidelines, and if they're not recognized, we followed the federal guidelines. So just comment on that.
Thank you. So I'm going to switch to the recommendations for the corridor. Since all of you have heard this at the previous meeting, I'm going to go through this relatively quickly. But as we've mentioned before, in Area 1, this is going to be tied to the Long Bridge decision. We don't have a specific alignment recommended right now. In Northern Virginia, it's a combination of third track from Fredericksburg up to Alexandria in the existing right-of-way, and fourth track from Crystal City into Alexandria. In Fredericksburg, we're recommending a third track through the downtown, utilizing the existing right-of-way as well. In Central Virginia, a third track from Spotsylvania to Doswell, again, utilizing the existing right-of-way. In Ashland, we are recommending that we will have 3 tracks north and south of the town. However, we would have 2 tracks through the existing downtown alignment. An important part of this as well is that we will have grade-separated overpasses at Vaughan and Ashcake Road on both the north and south side of Ashland, which will also provide a great deal of mobility across the tracks and address some of the emergency vehicle concerns that we had heard as well too. And in Richmond, we are recommending what we call the full service option, which is to have full service at Main Street and Staples Mill. Yeah, one of them will work. Okay, so we would like to turn and talk with you a little bit about the Ashland and Hanover considerations. As the Secretary mentioned before, you all came here last year in November. We had a meeting downtown. We had a number of public comments as well. We then also convened a community advisory committee. I see many of the members here in the audience today. We met 5 times between May to September 2017, had public comments. And we do have a report that summarizes the outcomes of that process as well. In addition to that, we've had over 40 meetings in this corridor over the past year with private citizens, representatives from the college, and elected officials, and a number of public hearings too. So regarding the 323 recommendation, as the Secretary alluded to before, we will not have any direct impacts to buildings or parcels affected downtown or on the Randolph-Macon campus, and the avoidance of those impacts was a major justification for this recommendation. That includes construction-related impacts as well, which, while temporary, can also be very significant. However, there will be parcel-related impacts at the 2 overpasses that I mentioned at Vaughan Road and Ashcake Road. Regarding that, we do believe that we can still meet our operational goals with passenger rail, even with 2 tracks in there based on the operational modeling that we've done. But it's important as well that we be able to accommodate freight rail in the future. However, what we saw is that the majority, there are freight delays that we saw in our modeling, and I know CSX brought those up as well. But we saw those in the future no-build condition too. So even if we do nothing in this corridor and don't add any more passenger trains, we do expect that there's going to be some freight delays, and we'll need to work with CSX to look at how those can be mitigated. It may actually be outside of this corridor where we can make improvements that will actually have benefits in this corridor as well. But our next step is looking at a service development plan, and that's where we're going to look at things like schedules and how much service should be provided at all of the stations, including a station here in Ashland. As the Secretary mentioned, safety is still a very high priority of us. We do intend to continue to work with Amtrak, some of the stakeholders here, and FRA to look at how we can improve safety in this corridor, both for pedestrians, bike users, and also cars as well. It's important to note that'll really happen, though, independently of DC to RVA, and but we will make sure that we coordinate it well with a study. So moving on to the Richmond area.
Jennifer,
sure.
Again,
yeah, absolutely.
I just want to make, I believe many of these safety improvements can be enhancements to mobility and tourism and in the downtown area. So this is not meant to say we're going to put a fence off and nobody goes back and forth. So I just want to make that clear. That's why we've directed, Jennifer to work with the community. How can we address safety but enhance the experience of downtown, because we do understand that is very critical to the community here. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure there'll be some trade-offs, but I just don't want anybody walking out of here saying there's going to be a fence put up and it's going to kill everybody's, but that's not what the intention of this is. And that's so. Mm-hmm.
Any other questions about Ashland right now, that recommendation here? Okay, I'm going to move on to Richmond. In the Richmond area, we have a very severely constrained rail network, particularly at Main Street Station, where we have a number of barriers that are I-95. We've got the triple crossing, which is the 3 crossings of the 3 rail bridges. That's also a major constraint, and also cultural resources, as we've mentioned before, in Shock Bottom, and a fair amount of development as well. So in order to make these alternatives work, if we were to have a single station at either Main Street or Staples Mill, it would have required an additional track over what we're recommending today. And what we found is that the constraints at Main Street Station and similarly on property impacts at Staples Mill make it very difficult to do that. So we really need an alternative with 2 stations that can make this work. Having a full-service alternative where we stop all of the trains at Main Street, but also at Staples Mill, allows us to still serve central business districts to central business districts. It's consistent with all of the past decision-making in this corridor, which has both the Tier 1 EIS, the Raleigh to Richmond EIS, Previous studies have all identified Main Street Station as the designated station for Richmond. There's a number of multimodal connections downtown, which we also believe will help alleviate the need for parking. But most importantly, it frees up, we will be putting passenger rail service on the S line, which is on the eastern side of Richmond, where today all the trains, with the exception of our Newport News train, use the A line. This, however, will free up that A line for CSX and for freight movements in that corridor. We've done a lot of work right now coordinating with DHR. This has been going on for over 15 years, really. But with this study with DC to RVA, it's since 2014, we've been coordinating with them. We've followed the Section 106 of the, for this process and guidelines from the Department of Historic Resources. We've recorded everything that's down in that corridor that's been identified in this area of potential effect. We've documented the 5 archaeological sites there and over 50 above-ground resources. In order to, when we were doing the conceptual planning for the station to look at the facilities as well, we did an overlay map where we overlaid those plans with historic maps, where we know there are historic resources, and also the draft plans, which are very preliminary, for Memorial Park down in that area. And we had a number of meetings with consulting parties, community groups, and other agencies during this as well. So in terms of the priorities, this is going to be developed incrementally as funding is made available. Our highest priority right now is really Northern Virginia, and then building south, eventually also moving into the Richmond area with the S-line improvements that would be needed there. Really, the Central Virginia and Ashland area are the very last areas where we would even look at building this out, just in terms of priorities and where the benefits can be achieved. The costs that we have up here really are just for comparative purposes, to compare the size of the alternatives. The costs themselves will also have a number of additional soft costs involved in them, but will depend on the year in which these are actually constructed. So with that, we're still responding to public comments. We are going to have a recommendations report that we'll provide to you this month. We will be bringing this back in the December meeting and asking for a action on the resolution that we have here that we'll discuss next. After that, we would go and we do expect that we could complete the final EAS and get a record of decision by 2019. So with that, any questions on the recommendations?
So at this time, I would open up the discussion for the board if there are any before public comment, and then I'm going to give an opportunity after public comment for continued discussion too. I want to point out here again on the numbers, let's just make clear there is no funding identified for the improvements here. So that again weighed heavily also in our decision to not impact or to try to impact the least amount of people. Because there simply is no funding, and I will tell you right now, I don't see any funding for this unless something politically changes significantly, either at the federal level, at the state level, or there's a significant change with our private parties in terms of their capital investment in this line. So having said that, doesn't mean it won't happen. As we all witnessed this, things happen pretty quickly we don't expect, so I'm not suggesting to you we won't continue to look, but I'm saying realistically, this is a planning document. We do not have the monies to do these improvements, and in fact, they would be, as Jennifer mentioned out, well behind other improvements made north of here, and quite frankly, a biggest improvement, that is the Long Bridge, would probably need to be expanded before we needed additional work here too, and that's not even in this particular study.
Absolutely.
So I want to make it clear, trying to be realistic also in terms of how we move forward with a decision. So any comments or discussion from the board before we turn it over to public comment? Yes, Mr. Whitworth.
To make sure I understood that right now there are 3 crossings, is that correct? North, south, and the middle of town?
Yeah, I mean, today there are, within Ashland, downtown Ashland, yeah, there's a number of grade crossings today. The Ashland and Vaughan are on the northern and southern edge of town, and that is where we would put the overpasses in, so.
And what was the recommendation with regard to downtown at-grade crossing?
I'm looking at Emily, the crossings would still stay, and they would still, but they would have the, show the barriers, the types of barriers that we see there today.
But that crossing would stay?
Yes.
Any other discussion or comments from the board? Okay, Jennifer, you want to take us through the resolution then before we go to public comment?
So we, this is the resolution, it's at your seats that we'll be considering in December. And, yeah, those are the public comments. And so what I'd like to do is just walk through quickly. I think we don't necessarily need to go through the whereas clauses, but it really does just go through the chronology of the project, the public involvement that's been conducted, and the fact that we've included alternatives for each of the different segments in this corridor. This does also refer to the Town of Ashland and the Community Advisory Committee here and the outreach that was done there. We have included in the now therefore be it resolved clauses are the recommendations that we just laid out for you in the presentation. We included the numbers of each alternative for each segment. But importantly, we did want to make clear as well that additional rail capacity will be needed in Ashland in order to meet those performance standards. If it is, if it is determined that additional capacity is needed in the future before 2045, then DRPT will be directed to do an additional study of this. And I think that's something we've acknowledged all along. As Secretary Lane said, we do anticipate there will be changes in freight and passenger volumes in the future and travel trends. But we did want to make clear that should this need to be considered in the future, it will be studied again. And then also that we will continue to work, the DRPT will work with the community and other stakeholders to look at safety improvements here in downtown Ashland as well. So that's the major components of the resolution that we'll have in front of us in December. Is there any questions at this point?
Ms. Valentine.
Thank you. When do you expect to have the record of decision from the FRA?
We are hoping to have that in early 2019.
2019. So if we are all hoping that they accept our recommendations for this. If they don't, what is the process for that?
You know, I think there will be a lot of work going into that ahead of time. You know, I think Emily, is there a specific process after after FRA makes their final recommendation in the ROD, or? Yeah, and we've been coordinating with FRA through this entire process, I should say. We work very closely with them, so they're very well aware of the recommendations that we're making.
And the reason I just ask is that there has been so much concern about this process, and that, you know, I'm sure for the folks who are here, trying to make sure that, you know, as we await a decision, that we would be prepared for any decision that would come from FRA.
Other comments or discussion? Okay, Jennifer, I've got one, and I failed to mention this up front. I do know that the college at Randolph-Macon is a big part of this community here, and I know when you covered in your presentation that we would have no permanent impacts to the college land. This is not unusual. I had a similar situation on Interstate 64 in Hampton Roads. Hampton University wanted assurances for that also. may be temporary as we move equipment, but in terms of long-term. And I would recommend to the board, and I should have brought this up before, but I would recommend that we might consider that we put in this resolution or a policy that it would be part of this resolution. There would be no taking of permanent land from the university, or we're going to stay within the current right-of-way to the in those areas which we haven't identified. In other words, particularly in that, because I think that would give assurances. Now, on the other hand, we're not going to let the people infringe upon our right-of-way, but it would also give assurances to them as they make their planning. So I would recommend to the board, we might consider that. I'm sure we're going to hear public comment from the college, but that's one of the things I think would be worthwhile to give a little more comfort that in their long-term planning that they would know that would have been the intention. Yeah, I think maybe I would consider that, but Jennifer, unless you have a problem with that at all.
We can work on some language for that.
For that, yes.
Yeah.
In other words, to assure, since that is certainly the intention of your recommendation and the board, other than those, what we specifically identified that we would make in this resolution, there would be no taking of any permanent property. And I think that would be helpful in the long-range plan of the university and others here in the community.
Okay.
So I'll offer that up as something that friendly recommendation that the board consider.
Okay, we'll work on some language
for that.
Okay. Okay.
Anything else for Jennifer?
Okay, so I think we're ready to go to public comment then.
Okay, so let me review the rules of public comment. First of all, anybody out here who wants to speak will be given the opportunity. We do ask you to stay to a 3-minute limit. Again, that's not because if we have 100 or 200, it's just our policy across the Commonwealth, and if we treat one area different than the other. So if I ask you to please wrap up, I would ask you to consider that, and please do so. Second thing, obviously, we don't make comments back now, but I'm going to open it up for discussion after this if the board wants to take notes and respond to any comment after the public comment and in a discussion up here for the community. And also, very important, I'm sure I'm going to mispronounce someone's name, so please do not take that as anything other than my inability to either read or pronunciate. So, because it's not meant as a slight in any way. So, anything else from the board before we call up? We have signed people that want to speak, but after that, I will make an open invitation to anyone out there who would like to make a comment, even if you haven't signed up. So, don't worry about it if you haven't signed up. Okay, what do we have? A microphone here for people in public comment to the left over here, so it'd be easier for the board. So first up, we have President Robert Lindgren from Randolph Macon College, and good morning, sir.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome members of the CTB Rail Subcommittee. I'm Robert Lindgren, President of Randolph Macon College, and we thank you and the community for visiting Blackwell Auditorium this morning and allowing me to speak. Randolph-Macon College has been pleased to be, I hope, a constructive part of the DRPT's planning process since last June, and most recently as active members of the Community Advisory Committee. Earlier this week, the college submitted written comments regarding the DEIS, and I would like to briefly summarize those here. We have, for 188 years, educated tens of thousands of leaders from Virginia and around the world. Today, our student body is the largest in our history, coming from 24 states and 19 foreign countries. Our success has been made possible by the superb work of our dedicated faculty and staff, some 450 of them, and it has also been made possible through the generosity and loyalty of our more than 10,000 living alumni, whose support has given us a ranking of 16th in the country among alumni participation. Over $125 million was donated during our recent capital campaign, allowing us to construct 9 new facilities in the past 7 years. In fact, our newest the Keeble Observatory was dedicated just this past Friday night. Our nearly 125-acre campus on both sides of the track has hourly students, faculty, staff, and visitors crossing, and those visitors included 100,000 last year. As our comments stated, we have vigorously said from the beginning we completely oppose the third rail at grade through Ashland and our college because of the irreparable damage it would cause, and so we're in full support of the Community Advisory Committee's unanimous rejection of that. We appreciate very much, Chairman Lane, your comment about a recommendation, a friendly recommendation of no taking of permanent land or permanent impact of the college. We do appreciate that very much. We've expressed our stated preference was for the western bypass, but as we heard today, it's your recommendation for the 323 alternative. We want to embrace the 323 in a way that, as you said, Chairman Lane, how we deal with it should include the need for major safety improvements to protect members of our campus as well as the community. We appreciate your recommendation for the 2 grade-separated overpasses at Vaughan and Ashcake Roads, but critical safety improvements should also include, in time, pedestrian tunnels and bridges at multiple locations bridging the east and west side of our campus. I'm the one speaking to you this morning, but I speak most especially on behalf of our students, both present and future. Their safety and well-being is paramount to me and the college, as I know it is to you. Thank you for allowing me to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I also want to thank you for the use of these facilities, and you've housed us many times on this, and we do appreciate the relationship. Thank you very much. Next up is Mayor Jim Foley. Good morning.
Good morning. Thanks, I'm back. First, thank you for the college for hosting again. Greatly appreciate it. Good morning to Secretary Lane, CTB, DRPT, and thank you for coming to our town again. It was a year ago that you came and you saw firsthand that the narrow right-of-way cannot support a third rail, and you understand that. My concern is, and we understand why you're choosing the 323, we understand it completely, but we do have longer-term concerns. What's the CTB going to do 20 years from now? And so my ask is kind of simple. Please add something in the resolution to share what you've learned with that future CTB and acknowledge that the narrow right-of-way through town cannot support a third rail. If we could support it, that would be great and we wouldn't have a problem. That right-of-way dates from 1838. There's simply no room. And if you could put that in the resolution, again, so that 20 years from now when the CTB looks at it, they say, oh, because we're going to have to go through the same process of educating people, bringing them down. And so if we could help jumpstart that and acknowledge that today, that would go a long way. I appreciate Secretary Lane's comments about safety improvements. We'll definitely work with you on that, something to enhance the town while recognizing the safety issues. So I appreciate that. Sorry. And the other thing is we want to remain a willing partner after the DC to RV process ends. And you did touch on this. This is your job to manage transportation to the Commonwealth. And over the next 20 years, we can't just put this away and wait. Things are going to be evolving. Hyperloop technology. Let's explore trench options within the town and other areas, not on Center Street. We're willing to work with you and partner on a long-term, non-destructive solution. Thank you.
Thank you, and I do appreciate, I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor, yeah, you deserve applause. I do appreciate the relationship we've had and the comments and the constructive back and forth.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Next up is Carrie Carlisle. Good morning.
Hi, good morning. I'm Carrie Carlisle. I am part of the beloved Western Hanover community. Thank you all, Secretary Lane, Director Mitchell, Emily Stock, and the engineers, wherever you went. Where'd John Morton go? Thank you all very much for your efforts, and I would like to formally request the CTB formally approve the 323 option for now. I understand new technologies are available or will become available, and engineers love puzzles and they love to solve problems. So again, I cannot thank you all enough. Again, Secretary Lane, that cloud you spoke of has been lifted, although may it be for 20 years. I doubt that you would agree to this, but as you have said, you would formally put in your works the wording that would preserve the college. We in the West would also love that you put in your words that you would not approach the West again. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Next is the Chair of Hanover County Board of Supervisors, Bucky Stanley. Good morning, sir.
Well, thank you very much. I'm not the chair right now. I just got demoted to just a regular member that I've for the last 34 years. So anyway,
Okay.
thank you very much. And I know I've spoke to you all before. Sometimes I'm Aubrey Stanley, sometimes I'm Bucky. I'm close to home, so it's Bucky today. So thank you very much,
All right.
Mr. Aubrey Lane. Good morning, Secretary Lane and members of the Commonwealth Transportation Board. I am Bucky Stanley, representing the Beaver Dam District on the Hanover County Board of Supervisors. I want to thank the staff of the Department of Rail and Public Transportation for the excellent job that it's done in educating community members and involving them in the process of making this very difficult decision. All of the staff members, and Jennifer Mitchell in particular, have been patient and responsive to the concerns, questions, and comments of the Hanover citizens, and their efforts are very much appreciated. DRPT recommendation this morning reflects the community engagement process and staff's recognition of the very real impact on the community that the selection of an alternative for the Hanover segment of DC2 RVA project will have. The selection of the bypass alternative would have immediate impacts on plans and property values of nearly 100 properties and more than 20 homes, even if the bypass is not built for the next 20 years. The selection of the third rail built through Ashland, even if built below grade, would have a similar effect on residents and businesses of Ashland. The 323 alternative is one of the least negative impacts. Moreover, the construction of bypasses north and south of Ashland would substantially resolve the problem of vehicle backups at the tracks in town and the obstruction of the emergency public safety equipment that exists today. I hope the CTB will adopt the staff's recommendation, and we thank you so much.
Thank you. I didn't mean to give you a raise or, you know, anyway. That's right. Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Stanley. Next is Henry Wilton and families, yes. Good morning, sir.
Good morning, Secretary Lane and members of the commission and the board. For the record, my name is Henry L. Wilton, and I am part of the Families Under the Rail. We moved here about 3 years ago, and we actually bought our house from Carrie and Bob. Their house actually with the train, if it went the Western Bypass, it was going through their house, and then the train was going to go ahead and come to their old house too. So they just seemed to be in the wrong way or in the wrong position all the time. So basically, I signed on as part of the Families Under the Rail. We do want to go ahead and thank the DRPT for the efforts that they've made to try to find the best alternative. We thought the trench alternative was good. Obviously, the town of Ashland didn't. We do support the 323. We think it's at least offensive at this time. And then, 20 years from now, technology may change, or obviously will change, and some other alternatives may come to bear and be better alternatives. We would like to go ahead and take the Western Bypass out of the choices for good. We moved out there because it is rural. I checked it, but we don't have a lot of development out there because it's slated to remain rural, and we'd like to keep it that way. We think this is, again, staying with the existing right-of-way and the 323 and the opportunity to, again, with new technology, to have it to work better in the long term. Again, we just would like to permanently remove the western bypass, and we thank you for all the hard work you've done. You know, it hasn't been an easy task for any of us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Paul Ring. Good morning, sir.
Good morning. Paul Ring, 940 Kitty Hamilton Circle within the town of Ashland. Generally supportive of the draft decision to go with the 323. I've submitted lengthy public comments. I want to touch on one thing which I did not have an opportunity to include in that just due to time constraints, and it's relevant to your discussion about choosing the 323, but with an eye towards looking at future traffic increases or potential traffic increases. I wanted to urge the CTB to keep an open mind on the Buckingham branch. One of the concerns I have with prior discussions of it is it seems to have been almost a bit of a straw man in that the Buckingham branch was being considered as a total solution to the problems in putting high-speed rail on it or moving significant amounts of freight on it. I think that the CTB should look at any incremental traffic flows on the Buckingham branch as an option to relieve any future congestion. I think they should consider moving passenger trains that are regional in nature, either the existing Newport News trains or one of the Norfolk trains that are not kind of designated high-speed rail to the Buckingham branch. I understand it would take major improvements and money, but it seems to me that one of the overarching goals, which was reiterated in the discussion today, was to make use of existing right-of-way. And it just seems to be a total waste for the Buckingham branch to not be part of a holistic solution. Again, I'm not trying to state that you're going to have double stacks on Buckingham branch. I understand the triple crossing, but if you can put 6 to 8 regional Amtraks on the Buckingham branch, it seems to me the cost to do that really wouldn't be that much more than building totally 2 new tracks or building a trench through a currently developed area. The right-of-way is there, and the other thing I want to mention is that the impacts which have excluded the Buckingham branch are impacts that will be felt elsewhere. The concern about wetlands, if you read the draft EIS, wetlands are mentioned as an impact that would be had on the western bypass. There's concern about the Buckingham branch for Dawswell for historic property sites. Well, that's a concern through any sort of downtown Ashland. So again, I'm not asking for the Buckingham branch to be considered in this resolution, but 20 years from now, if traffic increases, can it be alleviated by putting a minimal number of trains on the Buckingham branch and doing upgrades there rather than on the RFMP main line? Very quickly, I just had some questions. Hopefully you can answer when the moves back to the CTB discussion. Once the final EIS is submitted, when it goes to the FRA, is there going to be a public comment on that or a kind of intervener comment period? My main concern is, Mr. Secretary, you mentioned CSX having lengthy comments. Are they going to get a second bite of the apple when we go to the FRA? Thank you.
When we get to discussion on that, so put that down to on that, right? If you would, please. Thank you, sir. Next is Mr. Was that Mr. Hodges?
No,
that was Ring, yeah. Mr. John Hodges.
John Hodges, 106 Howard Street, member of Town Council. I'm totally surprised by this selection. Mayor Foley spoke on behalf of Town Council. The only comment I would make, and I support his comments, is that I couldn't hear Ms. Stock's response to the question. That would be good if it's not on the record. I would like to hear what happens if the FRA doesn't follow your recommendation. Thank you very much.
Sir.
After the meeting, I'll ask Emily to come up to the end of the table and engage in the discussion.
Okay, that'll be fine. Well, yeah, we'll invite Emily to be in the discussion and make sure we answer that question. Is this Vardy Hodges? Do I have that right?
I found out why I
I see. You have a spouse similar to mine.
That's great. I'm Vandy Hodges.
Andy, excuse me, I apologize.
Wife of John.
Yeah.
We thought we were just signing in. So I'm happy to be here and appreciate the process. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. My wife signed me up for things I didn't know I was signed up to also. I can assure that. All right, let me see if I can read it. Wayne, is that Hazard? Yeah, Wayne Hazard. Oh, yeah, Mr. Hazard, sure, I know. Good morning.
Thank you, and good morning to you. I really appreciate all the time and effort that DRPT and this board has put into acknowledging the ramifications of things going through Ashland and and taking it into account. I'd like to acknowledge that even though we could have had the western bypass, the grade crossing problems would still exist. And I think we should take this as an opportunity now to go to the FRA and talk to them about the safety issues that we've addressed so that we are prepared as traffic improves. I think it's also an opportunity for the town and the community to come back together and work together for these things, because the town is very much a part of Hanover County, and we the problems we've had and the relationship has, let's say, struggled during this time. And I would do everything I could. I think as a board member, we will work with the town any way we can to address issues as they come up for them, anything that we can do to help. So I think we should look at this as an opportunity. We have a minimal impact on the future for both the people in and the businesses downtown, as well as the western bypass, western area. So thank you again for your support, and we look forward to working with you again in the future. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you, Mr. Hazard. I think this is Roseanne Schalt. Yes. Good morning.
Good morning. I'm Roseanne Shelf. I live at 305 College Avenue, and I also represent Ashland Museum and the Ashland Historic District. I'm relieved that you have chosen 323. It gives you an FRA a way to look into other methods of dealing with this problem. I would like you to be more aggressive in your recommendation to FRA by recommending they appoint a task force on new transportation technologies that are coming out just now, specifically the Hyperloop, but even more than that, the Elon Musk's deep bore, the boring company. It's being big, they're really working on that now, and I think it will be an accepted method of dealing with transportation. It will be less expensive than deep boring technology is today, and it will also reduce, if you use deep bore, you would reduce delays from lawsuits, you would reduce takings, money that you have to pay for people's property. It uses less real estate. It will give you many more options. It makes the I-95 corridor a lot more possible. Going under I-95 would be less expensive all around for everybody. That's an existing right-of-way. So anyway, I want to thank you for all your hard work and putting up with our I don't know, strident concerns. And I think you've come up with a good interim solution. But it is an interim solution. And that's why I urge you to do more, be more aggressive with the new technology. We shouldn't be using 19th century technology in the middle of the 21st century. Thank you.
Next one is Mr. Eugene Tranny.
Good morning. I'm Gene Trani, President Emeritus of Virginia Commonwealth University. For the last 2 years, I've advocated a single train station in Richmond to be located in the Boulevard area, immediately adjacent to the Greyhound bus station. I have been struck with the great citizen participation in Ashland and Hanover County about where the train station should be and what modifications should be made, and disappointed that there has been almost no discussion in the Richmond community about the train station or train stations. Neither Staples Mill nor Main Street, by your own study, are satisfactory to be a single station for high-speed rail. A station at the Boulevard would be much more convenient for the whole area to get to because of the interstate access. There's 300 acres of developable land in that area. Richmond has recently proposed that Richmond become the site for a new headquarters for Amazon, and they're putting up 60 acres at the Diamond. Think how important locating the train station at the Diamond would be to that proposal, and if not Amazon, other companies who would look at that area. It is booming. It is becoming a second downtown, and I believe it is the best site. I think that the board should look seriously at the recent communications, the op-ed piece from Michael Paul Williams, the email from John Meeser to the governor, and the letter from the National Trust for Historic Preservation about the slave burial grounds in Richmond. This is a very serious issue, and it is not enough to say that it has not been designated as a historic area by state government in the Commonwealth of Virginia. We are approaching our 400th anniversary of the bringing of slaves to the Commonwealth of Virginia. 300,000 people, slaves, passed through that area, and there is an awful lot of work to be done, and extending the platform 1,200 feet at Main Street Station and other improvements that would make Main Street even minimally tenable as a train station for high-speed rail will have a very disruptive effect on that whole area. We should celebrate with sadness what happened in that area, and we need several more years to study what is going on, and I urge you to look at those communications before you make your decision. Recall, please, that in 1993, Disney America proposed a planned theme park to be located in Haymarket, Virginia, which was 5 miles from the site of the Manassas battlefield, and Virginia went crazy, and Disney withdrew that proposal. You are talking about major expansions of the train station within hundreds of feet of this area, of Lumpkin's Jail, the possibility of a slavery museum, and I think you should seriously consider whether that factor overweighs whatever else is going to go on. Now, I know there have been studies 2 and 3 that talked about the central business district.
Give you a little leeway, but you've passed your 3 minutes, so I'd ask you to wrap up, sir.
This will be the last point.
Yes, sir.
I know this, you talk all the time about the central business district. I grew up in Philadelphia. 30th Street Station is not in the central business district. The old Reading Terminal was, and that has been reused. So I urge you to think again about whether there ought to be one single high-speed rail station in Richmond. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, very much for your comments. Now, that is all that have signed up, but I open it up now for anyone else who would like to address the board. If you make your way down the microphone and let us know your name and your address, that would be great, sir.
Ian Sutton, 712 South Center Street, Ashland. Good morning. On a number of occasions, I have heard Supervisor Stanley ask if we engineers can come up with a solution that satisfies all parties, property owners, business persons, CXX, Amtrak, and the taxpayers. There is, I think, an answer to this question, and that is to adopt new technology, specifically the Hyperloop. This is a topic I have researched in depth, and I ask 4 questions. Will it work? Is it safe? Is it socially acceptable? And can it make a profit? My answer to all 4 questions is a conditional yes, except for the third question, social acceptability, where I come up with a huge yes. Because, as Elon Musk pointed out in his 2012 white paper, the issues we face are not to do with transportation, they're to do with real estate. And in this area, the Hyperloop offers outstanding benefits. The issues we face then are not to do with technology or even economics. It's to do with political will. I urge the Commonwealth Transportation Board to call a timeout on the projects that are based on old technology and implement the technology of the 2020s. If I can help with this in any way, please let me know. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Morning.
Morning. My name is Bob DeLille. I live at 1000 South Center Street and Francis, right on the tracks. Thanks for all your hard work. The 323 option is I think, a good one, and it has my conditional support, and I'll phrase my condition as a question. The way that it was presented was that there would be no negative impact in downtown or on the college properties, which is great. That's great news. But I'm curious as to whether you have set the boundaries where the 3 stops and the 2 starts on the north and the south sides. For those of us who live just south of downtown, it would be good to know that. So during your comment periods, if you could address that, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Any other, oh, yes, ma'am. Good morning.
Hi, I'm Phyllis Laidlow. I live at 14097 Blunts Bridge Road, just north of Ashland. And I'd like to thank you for your recommendation today. And as I heard you talk about the cloud that's been over both Ashland and the Western Bypass, it occurred to me, the best description I have, it may be a cloud, but every one of the Western bypasses from 2 years ago when that first act showed up, it was like a bullseye on every house between Elmont and Route 1, all of the 4 alternatives, and really anywhere in between because it wasn't stable. So while you're removing that cloud, I'd really like to thank you for removing all of the bullseyes on everyone's house in the Western Bypass. And I really would like to ask everyone to support this recommendation next month. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Anyone else that would like to address the board before we close public comment? Okay, seeing none, thank you all very much for your comments this morning and appreciate all the comments you've done over the last few months. I'm going to open it out and up for discussion from the board. Emily, you want to come up here and join us so we can answer that one question. Let me make one comment about resolutions in general in terms of whether or not, where they rank in terms of formally and forever sealing something or not. A resolution does not bind a future board. It does give guidance in going forward. To remove any significant, and the best thing would be have legislation passed in that. But in terms of the board resolutions, it's the intent, and they are taken very seriously, but a board could vote in the future to change them. That's just, unfortunately or fortunately, the way these work. We've just gone through, quite frankly, a very significant exercise in looking at all the resolutions taken over the years and different things, and exercise or gotten rid of the ones that are no longer applicable. But I don't want to suggest that it doesn't have a lot of weight. It does have weight. But I don't want to also insinuate that if we have passed a resolution, that means that it's forever cannot be changed, because that is not the case also. Now, having said that, there were a couple things that came up that I would throw up to the board. We can certainly put in a whereas clause that we believe that a third rail would cause significant impact to downtown, and whereas a clause that a bypass would have significant impact to homeowners in that. I think that's probably about as far as we could go in terms of but I think that is just stating the obvious, and we've come through. So I would suggest that we may put something in that language, Jennifer.
Sure.
Just a whereas, a statement that the board recognizes it, and that regarding the property, you know, the right-of-way, staying in the right-of-way in that regard, that would be resolved that we would want to do that.
Yes.
So that's the way I would address those two issues in terms of giving guidance to future boards what the intention of this board was in that. So,
Secretary?
Yes, Mr. Grozinski.
I think that also does protect the homeowners out there, because, you know, in full disclosure in a real estate deal, you have to talk about possibilities, and at least they could present, well, this is the resolution that right now is in good standing. Right. And that may help them out there as well.
Yes, and that's why I say, just again, I agree with you, Mr. Grozinski, where just a whereas that is, you know, our the due diligence is shown to be a significant impact to the homeowners on the bypass routes, and to a third rail through the town would be helpful in that regard. So let me, Emily, do you want to answer the question?
Sure, and I think Emily's also, I think people are getting the answer on the exact boundaries on the two tracks right now too. But the first one, though, about the process and the recommendations and how FRA makes them, just to clarify, we will be providing recommendations to FRA. We work very, very closely with them throughout this entire process. And we actually briefed them yesterday. They're aware of our recommendations. We obviously can't speak at all to what they could choose to do in the future, but I can tell you that they have been on board with us in this whole process. The actual process itself for the final EIS and a record of decision is a little bit up in the air, only because there are new streamlining regulations that are being implemented at the Department of Transportation and the Federal Railroad Administration. But what has been discussed is we would do a combined FEIS and record of decision. At the end of the day, though, it's their decision. I can say that we will probably know about it and have the opportunity to address any concerns they have if they were to deviate from this board's recommendation. But at the end of the day, we do have to accept it. I do want to remind everybody, though, that we are also the agency or the state that would be implementing anything and deciding how to use our funds. So there's, you know, while that would be in the record of decision, at the end of the day, it'll be the Commonwealth's decision to determine, you know, where rail investments are needed the most and where they get the most bang for the buck. We'll obviously have to coordinate that and negotiate with CSX as well as we're trying to add passenger trains.
I'd also just piggyback onto that in terms of the point about the federal authorities getting them to adopt new technologies. I think you can look to see what's going on in Washington today, that depending on who the administration is, just passing a regulation or study or whatever does not necessarily mean that the new administration will continue on those paths. That's just the way our democracy works. So we have participated and do with the federal government and their agencies, whether it's drone technology, this type of technology. In fact, as I said, we're using it now in Virginia. And Jennifer hit on the point. At the end of the day, and particularly with this administration, they are pushing more down to decision-making levels at the state because they are reducing the funding coming our way. So in that regard, it will be a lot of the state decisions in working with these new technologies and how we implement those going forward. So I don't know if that's comfort or not. It's just the way the process it tends to work in that. Yeah, Mr. Brown.
So just to clarify your last statement, So notwithstanding the final record of decision made by FRA, at the end of the day, the Commonwealth will have to determine how to proceed, whether to proceed with the project, which does allow for there to be some influence, right? I mean, I think that's, paralleling that with my day job here, that at the end of the day, we don't have to build anything we don't want to build. If it's recommended that we build it somewhere, we don't want to build it.
That'll go into whether or not we can add passenger trains, of course, but that's correct.
Right.
Yeah, at the end of the day, we are the implementing party.
Mr. Whitworth?
Clarification, in the FRA issuing a record of decision, what role, if any, does the position of CSX play in that?
I'll let Jennifer go in detail, but it does play a role. They will look at the comments, and I cannot underestimate that it is their tracks in that. And I don't want to any way try to misstate. We have a good working relationship with CSX. Just because we may have taken a different recommendation doesn't mean they're not very important partners to the Commonwealth, and we'll continue to work with them, and they've been a very significant partner in helping us get to this point. So, but it will be considered as part of this public comment period. And the question about do they have another bite at the apple, quite frankly, constituents always have the ability to advocate for their position with the federal government or the state government, regardless of whether or not it's through a public comment period or through lobbying or other means. So I certainly would expect CSX to make their position known over and above this public comment period.
So, Emily, I think, have you gotten the information on specifically the boundaries of the 2 tracks versus the 3?
Right. So the track section would be from just south of Ashcake Road to just north of Vaughn Road, about 9,000 feet of 2 tracks through the town of Ashland. So that would be the 2-track section.
Okay.
And of course, Vaughn and Ashcake would be grade separated under this alternative.
Other comments or discussion for our discussion now, or Jennifer, the resolution, anything the board want to bring up in this regard?
Mr. Chairman,
yes,
just if I might explain my late arrival, they actually closed all lanes of 95 heading south a little bit before 8 o'clock this morning, and I got stuck. It took me more than an hour to go to Route 1. So I apologize. I really did intend to be here to hear the testimony, but I'm expecting from the conversation that you heard many of the things we've heard before. So just didn't want people to think I blew this off.
No. It'd be nice to have more passenger trains. We did back and forth.
Here's the part, Mr. Secretary. I did think about taking the train down this morning, but I didn't have a way back home until after NVTA meets tonight, so I didn't do it.
That's right, so I understand. No, it's been, I think, Ms. Hines, a good discussion, and I know you've been briefed on the recommendation. So is the board comfortable with the resolution, with the as couple of whereases about the impact on the 3rd rail through town, impact of a bypass on the homeowners, and another resolution that we would try, it's the intent of the board to not have any permanent impacts in the city outside of where we've already identified where you need to, if there's in there, and specifically naming, obviously, the town and the college. Is the board okay with that? Yes, Mr. Brown?
If I may, I just wanted to, I want to reiterate what I think Chairman Lane has already addressed with regard to the excellent work done by the DRPT staff. But I also wanted to acknowledge the hard work that was done on the part of the leadership and the advocates of the County of Hanover and the town of Ashland. Mr. Foley, Mr. Hazlett, Mr. Stanley, President Lindgren have been in constant communication, have traveled, they've literally followed this board, some of the members specifically. They've communicated to make sure that we we're fully informed of all the interests. As the chairman said, this is not an easy decision. At the end of the day, in order for this progress to happen, someone and something is going to be impacted. And it's not that it is done without regard to the individual circumstances, but at some level it has to be factored in that something is going to be impacted. And I think the staff in being aware and listening and engaged, both from the citizenry as well as this board, has worked really hard to find, I think as we would describe it, the least destructive and impactful course. And although it does not remove the cloud in its entirety, I think as it's been described, we can't bind a future board. I think this does provide some acknowledgement that we've heard you, and we're sensitive to your concerns, and we want to find a way to make this work in the interest of all folks. So as the Richmond District Representative, I wanted to thank you for your diligence and courteousness in engaging in this process, and thank the board and the chairman for being present. So,
anything else?
May I just,
Yes.
I wanted to follow
Yes.
up on something
Ms.
Carly
Malahide.
said. The comments, and Jennifer, Director Mitchell, you and your team really have done an outstanding job. We've come a long way in a year. But some of the comments meant, all of the comments, I think were just incredibly thoughtful. And for those who actually raised the issue of innovation, technology, the boring, the hyperlink, making sure that even though we're making the recommendation today on the 323, that we continue to investigate looking at options so that regardless of decisions made in the near future or in the long term, that we're better prepared for that. And that is just a part of our strategy as well. So I really appreciated just many of the suggestions and thoughts that you brought forward today.
Other comments? Okay, Ms. Mitchell, I think that you have your direction. So we'll update the resolution, and we'll post that onto the public and see the adjustments to it.
And we will have a recommendation report for you all. If there's any new information that comes to bear over the next several weeks before the December meeting, we'll certainly bring that to you as well. So.
Okay, so certainly from my perspective, and I think I'll speak for the entire, not only subcommittee, but the board, I hope this can now allow the community to sort of work together in going forward, and let's put, I've heard the word stride, and put that behind us. I've come to understand what a great community it is to live and raise your family in here, and both the town and the surrounding areas, what the historic and what it means. And I hope that now with this forward, you'll have our commitment. We'll work with you on these safety and going forward, but it allows the community to come back together and come back to where it was before we had to interrupt this, unfortunately, with this decision. Because at the end of the day, that's really what it is. We started all this. We really want to offer transportation that makes people's lives better and opportunities better, not disrupting and just doing things just because we're a government and we can do them. That's not what we're about. So again, thank you all for your comments, and we'll, like I say, the next step, we'll post the resolution. Anything comes up, Jennifer will let us know, and the CTB will be voting on this at its December, I think it's the 6th meeting. That's the way forward, and I want to thank you all for your participation, and with that, we'll come to adjournment. Thank you very much.